The chamber is already tense, the air thick with the weight of political theater, when suddenly a sharp voice cuts through like glass shattering against marble. Dan Crenshaw slams his hand on the table, his tone rising with raw anger as he bellows, "Stop talking!" The words ricochet across the room, stunning those in attendance. For a moment, the entire chamber seems to freeze, eyes darting, jaws tightening, a collective gasp rising from an unseen audience. The outburst doesn't come as a measured interjection, but as a command, dripping with the entitlement of someone desperate to dominate. The echo of his voice lingers, not just in the room but in the minds of everyone watching at home, where screens replay his red face and clenched jaw in slow motion. The silence that follows is almost unbearable. A congressional setting, normally buzzing with crosstalk and formalities, suddenly feels like a boxing ring under a single spotlight. Crenshaw, framed by his own fury, becomes the aggressor whose outburst has crossed the invisible line between debate and bullying. Viewers feel the sting of his words as if they were meant for them, the insult carrying the weight of dismissal, the attempt to silence echoing beyond the walls of politics into the lived experiences of anyone who has ever been told their voice does not matter. Across from him, Jasmine Crokett sits unmoved, her posture upright, her face betraying none of the chaos his rage attempts to unleash. In her stillness lies the promise of a storm far greater than his shouting could ever summon. The contrast is striking on one side, a man losing control of his composure. On the other, a woman wielding silence as her shield, preparing to strike with calm precision. The camera of public perception lingers on this moment of imbalance, a dramatic tableau that feels both shocking and inevitable. Audiences online are already clipping, editing, and sharing the exchange, their reactions flooding comment sections with outrage and disbelief. The narrative leaps beyond the chamber and onto timelines across America. This isn't just politics, it's theater, it's spectacle. It's a cultural clash embodied in one explosive command and one unbroken silence. The audience is hooked, hearts pounding, eager to know what comes next. Because this opening scene has made one thing clear: the battle lines are drawn, and the storm has only just begun. The echoes of that outburst still hang in the air, but the clash becomes more than a single exchange. It transforms into a symbol of something larger simmering across the country. In a nation already fractured by division, that command to silence carries the weight of history, reminding viewers of every moment when arrogance sought to mute truth, when the powerful leaned on volume instead of substance. The stakes rise beyond the chamber, beyond the day's agenda, because this confrontation touches something deeply personal for millions of Americans watching. It is no longer just a congressman and a congresswoman. It is two visions of America colliding, one built on control through intimidation, the other on resilience through dignity. The camera of imagination pans outward, sweeping across households where families watch in disbelief. Parents shake their heads at the audacity of a public servant screaming at a colleague, while younger viewers scroll furiously, replaying the clip with captions that highlight the imbalance. The question grows louder in living rooms and on timelines alike. If this is how leaders behave under pressure, what does that say about the values guiding the nation? Crenshaw's demand to shut Crokett down becomes a shorthand for a wider sickness, the attempt to erase, belittle, or silence voices that refuse to bend. Each replay is not just entertainment, but a mirror, and people cannot look away. The tension sharpens when we recognize that moments like these never exist in isolation. They fit into a broader cycle. Politicians choosing outrage over dialogue, noise over nuance, confrontation over cooperation. In this cycle, Crenshaw's eruption is not an accident but a tactic, a way to project dominance in the absence of clarity. Yet the tactic backfires because the louder he grows, the more obvious it becomes that his fury hides insecurity. Crokett, by contrast, embodies the counterforce her very presence daring viewers to consider what it means to stay calm when others lose control. As the script tightens, the atmosphere turns cinematic. The lights dim in the imagination, and the audience feels the pulse of a nation on edge. Each pause before Crokett speaks is weighted with suspense, every glare from Crenshaw magnified as if the walls themselves are leaning in to listen. The scene no longer belongs to the committee but to the people, who sense they are about to witness a moment that will be replayed, quoted, and dissected for days to come. The FOMO element creeps in. What happens next is not just important, it is unmissable. Even before Crokett opens her mouth to respond, the stakes have been raised. Her silence after the insult is not weakness but a deliberate choice, a chess move in a game that Crenshaw has already misplayed. The longer she waits, the more power she gathers, the more the audience leans forward, knowing instinctively that her words will strike deeper than any shout. Suspense thickens like smoke in the room. Viewers can feel it, their anticipation growing heavier with each beat. And then comes the subtle tease of what's to follow. The camera in the mind's eye pans slowly from Crenshaw's fury to Crokett's poise, cutting between them as though preparing for a duel. The silence becomes unbearable, the tension cinematic. Social media is already ablaze with speculation, but the true showdown hasn't even begun. The audience senses that they are standing at the edge of something unforgettable, a clash that will define more than a single debate. It will leave an imprint on how truth and arrogance are remembered in this era. The question lingers, vibrating through every pause. What happens next changes everything. Dan Crenshaw strides into the spotlight carrying the kind of reputation that was carefully crafted over years of public appearances and political theater. His image as a veteran, a fighter, a man of grit has long been polished to shine in the public eye. But beneath the layers of valor and patriotic branding lies a far more complicated figure. He has built his career not only on his service but on an ability to channel outrage into applause, turning fiery rhetoric into headlines. The uniform and the eye patch became symbols larger than the man himself, a shorthand for toughness and resilience. Yet toughness on the battlefield does not always translate into strength in debate, and the cracks in his persona reveal themselves most clearly when someone challenges his narrative. That's when the voice rises, the tone sharpens, and the mask of composure slips. He thrives in spaces where his words can dominate unchecked, where his fiery tone is mistaken for authority. Rallies, interviews with sympathetic hosts, and scripted appearances often give him the freedom to project control. But the controlled environment of a committee hearing is different. Here, facts matter, and interruptions cannot erase them. This is the arena where arrogance is tested, and where Crenshaw's tendency to shout rather than substantiate begins to betray him. For years, critics have noted his contradictions, preaching about dignity while resorting to belittlement, demanding accountability while sidestepping questions, projecting calm while simmering with barely hidden frustration. Each inconsistency is a loose thread, and on this day, in this confrontation, they begin to unravel in full view of the nation. Audiences familiar with his career recognize this pattern. They have seen the smirks when he deflects, the sharp tone when pressed on uncomfortable truths, the performative outrage used to rally his base. It is a style built not on persuasion, but on performance, a gamble that volume will drown out reason. But in the chamber, facing Crokett's quiet poise, the gamble backfires. Instead of intimidating, his shouting exposes fragility. The very image of unshakable strength that he cultivates becomes hollow, reduced to a man raising his voice in desperation as his arguments collapse. The backstory digs deeper into how this persona was constructed. From early political campaigns, Crenshaw leaned heavily on narrative heroic service, steadfast conservatism, a voice for values under attack. These themes resonated with supporters hungry for symbols, and for a time they shielded him from scrutiny. Yet, as his platform grew, so did the spotlight, and with it came questions. Why the reliance on outrage rather than policy? Why the repeated moments of condescension toward colleagues, especially women and people of color? Slowly, the carefully crafted myth began to fray. Viewers who once admired the image started to see the cracks, the defensiveness that seeped through whenever he was challenged. This confrontation with Jasmine Crokett fits squarely into that larger pattern. He is not just shouting at her. He is shouting to protect an identity that feels threatened. The aggression is not a show of strength but a symptom of fear, fear that calm truth will dismantle bluster, that quiet resilience will overshadow noise. Crokett does not need to raise her voice to expose him. His own inability to remain composed does the work for her. This is the irony of his downfall. The man who built his brand on toughness is undone by the smallest display of fragility, the inability to let another voice finish a sentence. In cinematic terms, he becomes the antagonist whose flaws are revealed not through exposition, but through his own actions. The audience watches as arrogance blinds him, as the need to dominate transforms into the moment that will haunt his reputation. Every contradiction in his career comes to life in this exchange. He preaches respect, yet delivers commands dripping with disrespect. He speaks of honor, yet resorts to humiliation. He sells himself as a man of composure, yet unravels in full view of the cameras. The dissonance is undeniable, and viewers are forced to reconcile the image with the reality. What makes this downfall even more striking is how ordinary his tactic is shouting down a woman in an attempt to seize control. It is a gesture so familiar in American history that it carries with it the weight of generations, resonating with anyone who has ever been told their voice did not belong. His arrogance, then, is not just personal but symbolic. He becomes a stand-in for every figure who has confused power with loudness, every leader who has mistaken aggression for leadership. And as the audience absorbs this framing, the stage is perfectly set for the counterbalance. Crokett's composure, waiting quietly, preparing to deliver the kind of response that history remembers. By the time this backstory closes, Crenshaw's image has shifted. No longer the decorated symbol of grit, he appears instead as a man trapped by his own contradictions, flailing louder the more he feels control slip away. The audience can feel the anticipation building, knowing instinctively that this setup is leading toward a reckoning, that the louder he yells now, the harder his collapse will resonate when the tables inevitably turn. His downfall is not sudden. It has been written into his character all along. This moment with Crokett is simply where the mask cracks wide open, where the performance collides with reality, and where arrogance finally meets its match. Jasmine Crokett's story does not begin in the spotlight, nor in the ornate chamber where voices clash and cameras roll. It begins in the quiet grind of perseverance, in a journey marked by barriers that could have silenced her long before Dan Crenshaw ever tried. From the very start, her life has been a series of encounters with forces that underestimated her, doubted her, or attempted to push her aside. Yet every challenge became another layer of steel in her character, shaping the calm authority she now carries. Unlike those who were handed platforms, Crokett earned her presence in the political arena through grit and sacrifice, through service that demanded more of her than bluster ever could. Her backstory is one of contrasts. While Crenshaw cultivated performance, Crokett cultivated purpose. She came from spaces where success was not guaranteed, where every achievement required resilience against odds stacked high. Education, community advocacy, and the long nights spent working cases that most would turn away from became her training ground. She saw up close the cost of injustice, the toll that systemic inequality placed on ordinary families. Rather than retreat, she leaned into the fight, developing a reputation not as someone who shouted the loudest, but as someone who stood firm when standing firm was hardest. These experiences etched a quiet authority into her voice, the kind of authority that does not need volume to be heard. The sacrifices she made along the way form the spine of her credibility. She did not build her career through staged outrage, but through service that demanded patience and sacrifice. She worked for communities that rarely had a microphone, for people whose struggles often went unseen. Each step up the ladder came with resistance, each opportunity shadowed by those who thought she could be dismissed. But Crokett's strength was never in conforming to expectations. It was in breaking through them. Her persistence in the face of dismissal is what makes her presence in the chamber so electrifying. She is not simply defending herself in a debate. She is carrying the weight of every barrier she has already overcome. When the audience learns this history, they feel more than admiration. They feel kinship. Many see their own struggles reflected in her story, the times they too were silenced, doubted, or told to stop talking. Crockett's resilience becomes not just her own, but a shared symbol of survival and dignity. In cinematic terms, she embodies the archetype of the hero who has walked through fire, who has been forged by struggle into a figure prepared for the ultimate confrontation. Her calm in the chamber is not accidental. It is the natural result of years spent learning how to hold ground without shouting, and how to fight battles that do not reward noise but reward resolve. This preparation becomes especially important when placed against Crenshaw's outburst. Where he has relied on performance, Crokett has relied on patience. Where his story is shaped by spectacle, hers is shaped by service. The juxtaposition is not just political, it is moral. In her backstory lies the reason why his insults failed to pierce her composure. She has faced harder battles, endured deeper dismissals, and emerged stronger every time. A man shouting across a chamber is nothing compared to the storms she has already weathered. The audience feels this truth, even if it is never spoken aloud. As the script unfolds, Crockett's origins become her greatest weapon. Her story is not one of inherited power, but of earned resilience. She does not need to remind the room of her credibility. It is embedded in her very presence. Each calm response she offers carries with it the weight of the years that built her, the late nights, the uphill climbs, the voices that once told her she did not belong. In standing firm against Crenshaw's attempt to silence her, she is standing for everyone who has ever been told the same. Her backstory transforms what could have been a simple debate into something larger, a cultural moment of vindication, a narrative where dignity defeats dismissal. The emotional charge of her history sets the stage for the showdown to come. The audience, now aware of what she has carried to reach this point, leans closer, invested not only in the argument but in the personal stakes. They know she is not just speaking as a congresswoman, but as someone who has lived through struggle, someone uniquely prepared for this exact confrontation. Every second of composure becomes more than a tactic. It becomes the culmination of her journey. And with that knowledge, viewers are primed for the transformation that will follow when she finally unleashes her measured, devastating response. By the end of her backstory, Crokett emerges not just as a participant in a debate, but as a hero of a larger narrative. She is the embodiment of persistence, dignity, and service, standing in sharp contrast to the arrogance across from her. The audience does not just root for her, they believe in her, because her calm is no performance. It is the product of a lifetime of resilience, the living proof that true power is not about silencing others but about refusing to be silenced. In that light, the chamber becomes a stage for something inevitable, a reckoning where her history collides with his arrogance, and where the quiet strength of her journey prepares her to deliver the blow that will echo far, beyond the walls of Congress. The chamber thickens with tension as the debate tips from measured exchanges into a raw contest of willpower. The early jabs have already set the tone, but now the confrontation sharpens. Dan Crenshaw leans forward, his words no longer just arguments but sharpened blades of provocation. Each sentence carries the rhythm of dismissal, his voice pitched to echo across the room, to seize the attention of cameras and allies alike. He punctuates his statements with sweeping gestures, trying to command not only the space but the narrative itself. The performance is deliberate, almost theatrical, designed to overwhelm through volume and spectacle rather than substance. To him, escalation means dominance, and dominance means control. Yet Jasmine Crokett remains unmoved. She sits in her place with a steadiness that unsettles him more than any shouted rebuttal ever could. Her eyes track his movements, her posture upright, her face unreadable. The louder he grows, the more she embodies restraint, letting the storm whip around her without moving from her center. Every time Crenshaw cuts in, trying to drown her out, she pauses, allowing silence to highlight his desperation. To the audience, the contrast becomes unmistakable. One man scrambling to seize attention through noise, one woman holding the floor with quiet, undeniable authority. The escalation builds not only through Crenshaw's volume but through his increasingly personal tone. His barbs turn sharper, no longer about the issue at hand but aimed directly at Crokett herself. He frames her as inexperienced, accuses her of overstepping, and tries to box her into silence with rhetorical traps. Each word is meant to provoke, to draw her into the shouting match where he feels strongest. But Crokett's refusal to take the bait transforms the moment. Instead of matching his aggression, she uses his energy against him. She waits. She listens. She lets him unravel. The camera lingers on this duel of composure versus chaos. Viewers at home can see the sweat forming on his brow, the tightness in his jaw, the way his interruptions begin to blur into noise rather than persuasion. Meanwhile, Crockett's silence becomes louder than his voice. It tells the audience that she is not rattled, not cornered, not intimidated. Each measured breath, each calm expression, communicates that the real control belongs to her. She knows the moment of response is coming, and by holding it back, she amplifies its eventual impact. Around them, the chamber feels the shift. Some lean forward, sensing the weight of what is unfolding. Others exchange glances, aware that Crenshaw's performance is teetering toward spectacle rather than argument. The escalation has not shaken Crockett. It has revealed him. He wanted to dominate the stage, but in overreaching, he has handed it to her. The drama becomes less about the issue itself and more about the clash of styles, a visible contest between the old politics of bluster and the new politics of composure. This tension is not lost on Crockett. She understands that her silence is not passive, it is strategic. Every second she withholds her full response, the audience's anticipation grows. They are waiting for the moment when she finally steps in, when her voice cuts through the noise with precision. It is a duel of timing, and she knows the longer she lets him burn his energy, the sharper her counterstrike will land. Her patience in this escalation is not weakness, but weaponry. The chamber begins to mirror a courtroom drama, where one lawyer paces and bellows while the other waits for the perfect cross-examination. Crockett knows that when she finally speaks, her words will not be buried under fury, they will ring out with clarity. And clarity in this space is power. Every escalation from Crenshaw digs him deeper into a hole of his own making, while every moment of Crockett's calm builds toward a release that will feel inevitable and devastating. By the time this section closes, the escalation has transformed into a spectacle of imbalance. Crenshaw's noise, once commanding, now appears desperate. Crockett's composure, once quiet, now radiates dominance. The audience feels the momentum shift in real time, sensing that the chamber is about to witness a reversal. The man who tried to shout her down has made himself vulnerable, while the woman he dismissed has turned silence into her greatest weapon. The escalation does not end with an outburst. It ends with anticipation. The air is charged with the expectation that Crockett is about to strike, that her calm will give way to a response both surgical and unstoppable. In cinematic terms, the scene hangs in suspension, the audience gripping their seats, waiting for the blow that they know is coming. Escalation has built the tension to its breaking point, and Crockett, steady and unshaken, now holds all the power to decide when and how it breaks. The silence that Jasmine Crokett has been holding like a coiled spring finally snaps into motion. After minutes of being interrupted, shouted at, and drowned out, she leans forward just slightly, her voice cutting through the chamber with the kind of calm that immediately commands attention. There is no rise in pitch, no need for theatrics, just a deliberate clarity that forces everyone in the room, and everyone watching beyond, to lean in. Crenshaw had wanted a shouting match, but instead he finds himself outmaneuvered by a woman who understands that the sharpest blade is the one that doesn't tremble. Her first words are simple, but they land with the precision of a scalpel. She calls out the interruptions not as personal grievances, but as proof of weakness. She frames his shouting as avoidance, his bluster as an admission that he has no real ground to stand on. The shift is immediate. Suddenly, the noise that filled the chamber moments ago feels hollow, a desperate attempt to cover a lack of substance. Crokett doesn't just counter his words, she reframes the entire exchange, painting him not as an authority figure, but as a man rattled by truth. As she continues, her cadence builds. Each statement feels heavier than the last, but never rushed. She lays out the contradictions in his arguments, the hypocrisy embedded in his attacks, and the selective morality that underpins his stance. Every time Crenshaw tries to interject, she pauses, allowing his interruptions to expose him once again. The room can hear it. A man running out of ground, a man who cannot stand against reason delivered with composure. His voice grows strained while hers grows steadier. The momentum shifts in waves. Crokett begins to weave in not just counter-arguments, but stories, moments from her community, echoes of voices often silenced in rooms like these. She speaks of families left behind by policies, of ordinary citizens whose struggles are invisible to men who raise their voices only to protect themselves. Her words pull the debate out of the narrow chamber and into the lives of millions watching. The chamber is no longer just a battleground between her and Crenshaw. It is now a platform where she channels the frustrations and dignity of people who rarely see themselves defended so fiercely. Social media has already started to catch fire. Clips of her calm response to his screaming flood timelines. Hashtags emerge within minutes, drawing a sharp contrast between the calm truth and the angry noise. Journalists post snippets of her takedown, labeling it a masterclass in composure. Even as she speaks, she becomes the center of a digital storm that validates her stance and magnifies the impact. The chamber is full, but the true audience is the millions whose faith in leadership often wavers, now witnessing a rare moment where dignity refuses to bow to arrogance. What makes the counterattack unforgettable is not just the facts she lays out, but the way she frames them into moral clarity. She reminds Crenshaw, and by extension the audience, that service is not about power but about responsibility. She reminds him that yelling does not make lies true, and that dignity is never diminished by silence, only sharpened by it. Every phrase is clipped into sound bites that feel destined to echo beyond the chamber, into classrooms, households, and news cycles. Each word becomes both an answer to his attacks and a lesson for anyone watching. This is what it looks like when grace dismantles fury. The crowd reaction, subtle at first, begins to swell. There are nods, murmurs, and shifts in posture among those present. Even opponents are forced to listen, aware that interrupting her now would only amplify the perception that they are unable to contend with her truth. Crenshaw himself begins to falter. His voice, once booming, grows hesitant. He looks less like a man in control and more like one realizing the ground beneath him is collapsing. His hands tighten on the desk, his eyes dart to allies for reassurance that doesn't come. He had sought to corner her, but now he finds himself cornered by the very spotlight he tried to dominate. Crokett does not let the moment pass without sealing it. She pauses deliberately, letting the silence hang before she delivers her final blows. Her closing words strike not just at Crenshaw, but at the culture of arrogance and entitlement he represents. She reframes the entire clash as a lesson for the nation, declaring that leadership is measured not by volume, but by vision, not by anger, but by accountability. The room stills, the weight of her words lingering like an echo. The cameras catch Crenshaw's reaction, a man visibly shrinking, stripped of the dominance he had tried to project. In that moment, the mic drop is not just rhetorical, it is symbolic. She doesn't need to raise her voice, slam her hand, or lean into theatrics. Her words themselves do the work, and when she leans back into her chair, composed as she began, the contrast is unmistakable. One figure unshaken, the other exposed. The clash that began with noise ends with his silence. The chamber feels altered. What was meant to be an easy display of control for Crenshaw has become a turning point, where his performance is remembered not for strength, but for collapse. Crokett has turned his aggression into her triumph, his interruptions into her stage, his volume into her victory. And as the cameras pull away, as the digital storm outside grows louder, the narrative is no longer his to command. She has seized it, reshaped it, and left it with a clarity that cannot be shouted down. Her counterattack is not just a moment of defense, it is a declaration of resilience. It tells those watching that calm does not equal weakness, that silence is not surrender, and that truth, when delivered with conviction, can dismantle even the loudest lie. The audience is left stunned, not because she shouted louder, but because she showed that she didn't need to. In a world where spectacle often overshadows substance, Crokett has proven that the most devastating mic drop is not about theatrics. It is about truth delivered without fear, and so the scene closes not with applause, but with an undeniable shift. Crenshaw had entered the chamber expecting to dominate with volume, but leaves diminished by dignity. Crokett, the one he tried to silence, leaves with her voice amplified far beyond the walls of the room. It is the kind of reversal that political history remembers not for the insult that started it, but for the calm response that ended it. The moment the exchange concluded, the chamber still echoed with its weight, but the real eruption unfolded far beyond those walls. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine Crokett's calm dismantling of Dan Crenshaw flooded timelines across every major social media platform. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Side-by-side videos showed Crenshaw shouting, his face contorted with anger, while Crokett sat steady and poised, delivering her words with precision. The split screen became a meme template overnight, captions mocking the futility of noise against the sharpness of composure. Hashtags surged into the trending lists. You calm vs chaos, her Crokett mic drop, your dignity wins. What had been one heated debate inside a committee room now ignited into a cultural firestorm. News outlets rushed to frame the story. Headlines used words like obliterated, schooling, and humiliation to describe Crenshaw's unraveling. Commentators replayed the moment on a loop, dissecting every pause, every glare, every line Crokett delivered. Cable news anchors, usually divided by ideology, couldn't resist acknowledging the drama. Even those attempting to downplay her performance inadvertently gave it more visibility. Every frame of her calm counterstrike was analyzed like a courtroom masterpiece, a lesson in how to dismantle bluster with unshakable dignity. Meanwhile, celebrities and public figures added fuel to the fire. A-list actors tweeted their admiration, calling her response Oscar-worthy. Musicians posted clips of her words remixed into songs, setting her calm delivery against pounding beats that turned into viral TikTok soundtracks. Activists and community leaders hailed her as the embodiment of grace under pressure, holding her up as a model for young women, especially young women of color, who are so often silenced in public discourse. For them, her performance wasn't just political. It was personal, a vindication of what it means to hold your ground when everything around you is designed to shake it. The ripple effect stretched into unexpected corners. High school debate coaches assigned her takedown as required viewing. Law professors cited it as an example of rhetorical control under duress. Memes proliferated so quickly that by the end of the day, Crenshaw's outburst had been reduced to punchlines. Cartoons exaggerated his red face and shouting posture, juxtaposed with Crokett's serene composure. Even late-night comedy hosts picked it up, crafting skits that mocked his desperation while celebrating her poise. What began as a clash between two politicians had evolved into a cultural moment that touched entertainment, academia, and activism all at once. Crenshaw, for his part, tried to respond, issuing statements and appearing on friendly media outlets to reframe the exchange. But every attempt seemed to backfire. Clips of him explaining himself were spliced with footage of his original outburst, making his defense look even weaker. The harder he tried to reclaim the narrative, the more it slipped from his grasp. Social media users mocked his efforts with the refrain, "You can't spin calm into chaos." His voice, once booming in the chamber, was now drowned out by the echo of Crokett's steady dismantling. Crokett, however, embraced the attention with measured humility. Instead of gloating, she framed her victory as belonging not just to herself but to the people she represented. In interviews, she emphasized that her response wasn't about embarrassing Crenshaw, but about standing firm in the face of disrespect. This approach only amplified her stature. She wasn't just the woman who silenced him, she became a symbol of dignity, a reminder that leadership is about rising above rather than sinking into the noise. Her refusal to revel in the chaos made her triumph resonate even more deeply. Across the nation, ordinary people found inspiration. Clips circulated in group chats, family conversations, and community meetings. Parents showed it to their children, pointing out that power doesn't come from shouting the loudest, but from standing unshaken. Teachers used it as a discussion point in civics classes. Ministers referenced it in sermons about integrity and grace under fire. The ripple effect turned one debate into a living parable, where the message extended far beyond politics. Dignity cannot be shouted down. The shockwaves kept rolling into the following days. Pollsters noted a bump in Crokett's favorability ratings, while Crenshaw's numbers sagged under the weight of public mockery. Editorial boards praised her restraint as a model for civic discourse. Activist groups used the moment to mobilize, turning her composure into a rallying cry for their causes. The incident became more than just a headline. It became a watermark moment, something etched into the collective memory of political culture. By the end of the week, the narrative was firmly established. The confrontation was remembered less for the volume of Crenshaw's voice and more for the clarity of Crockett's response. The shockwaves ensured that this wasn't a fleeting viral clip, but a lasting story, one that would be replayed, reinterpreted, and retold as a lesson in power dynamics. Crockett's calm had not only silenced a man in the chamber, it had ignited a movement of affirmation far beyond it. When the noise finally faded and the social firestorm began to settle into clarity, Jasmine Crokett's words lingered like a steady flame. The confrontation had been sharp, the takedown unforgettable, but what truly remained was the lesson embedded within it. She stood not just as a politician who had won a debate, but as a living reminder that leadership is measured in grace, not volume. Her calm response exposed more than Dan Crenshaw's weakness. It exposed a truth that transcended the chamber, a truth about dignity, resilience, and the unshakable power of composure in the face of arrogance. In the quiet after the storm, Crokett reframed the narrative. She emphasized that it was never about one man's outburst or one woman's comeback. It was about the deeper values America must decide to uphold. Do we reward shouting, belittling, and arrogance? Or do we honor restraint, clarity, and a commitment to truth? Her actions had already answered the question, but by speaking directly to it, she elevated the confrontation into a universal reflection. She reminded the public that true service is rooted in accountability, that real strength is quiet but unyielding, and that the loudest voice is not always the most powerful. The moral clarity hit home. Across communities, the lesson resonated with people who had been silenced, dismissed, or underestimated. Crokett became a symbol for anyone who has ever been told to sit down and stay quiet. Her composure turned into a roadmap. You don't have to match anger with anger. You don't have to lower yourself to the level of those trying to diminish you. Instead, you can hold your ground, let their noise unravel, and then speak with a force that carries far beyond the moment. What made the lesson powerful was its simplicity. In a world saturated with spectacle, Crokett showed that dignity outlasts drama. Crenshaw's shouting was loud, but it faded quickly into parody. Her calm was quiet, but it echoed long after the cameras stopped rolling. The exchange became a parable of modern politics. Noise may dominate in the short term, but only clarity and truth leave a lasting mark. For viewers, the contrast crystallized into a moral they could carry into their own lives, whether in classrooms, workplaces, or family disagreements. The chamber scene also reminded the nation of something even larger, that democracy itself depends not on who can scream the loudest, but on who can speak with the most integrity. Crokett's response embodied the spirit of accountability, proving that arrogance can be checked not with equal aggression, but with unshakable conviction. It was a lesson in citizenship, a reminder that the power of the people is not reflected in volume, but in values. The moment transcended partisanship and reached into the realm of principle, reminding Americans that politics, at its best, is about service, not self. By the end of the week, the confrontation was no longer just a clip. It had become a touchstone for reflection. Journalists framed it as a rare instance where dignity triumphed in plain view. Educators used it as a teaching moment. Parents pointed to it as an example of how to handle bullies without becoming one yourself. The confrontation itself was dramatic, but the resolution transformed it into something more enduring. a story about how to face disrespect without losing your own sense of self. Crokett's closing interviews sealed the morale. She refused to boast, refused to center herself as a victor, and instead turned the spotlight toward the values at stake. She spoke about respect, accountability, and service as ideals worth fighting for. Her humility deepened the impact, reminding the public that the true measure of leadership is not in how loudly you claim victory, but in how steadfastly you hold to principle. It was a resolution that left people not just entertained, but inspired and motivated to believe that dignity still has a place in public life. By the time the dust cleared, the lesson was undeniable. Arrogance may flare up, but dignity endures. Crokett had proven that truth spoken calmly can dismantle lies screamed loudly. And in that revelation, America found not just a viral moment, but a reflection of the kind of leadership it hungers for, measured, principled, and unshakable. And so the story circles back to where it began, with a man trying to silence a woman through sheer force of volume, and a woman answering not with rage, but with composure that echoed louder than any shout could. The title of this clash, Crenshaw Screaming, Crokett Calm, was more than just a headline. It was a lesson carved into memory, a reminder that truth delivered with dignity will always outlast arrogance delivered with fury. This moment will be replayed, reshared, and retold because it speaks to something larger than politics. It speaks to the America that wants leaders who embody grace, not bluster, vision, not vanity. It speaks to every person who has ever been underestimated, every voice that has ever been told to quiet down. Crokett showed that you don't need to match anger with anger. You need only to stand firm, speak clearly, and trust that integrity carries further than noise. If this moment resonated with you, if it made you pause and think about the values that matter most, don't let it stop here. Share this story, keep the conversation alive, and be part of the movement that uplifts dignity over division. Subscribe to stay connected, not just to the drama of politics, but to the deeper lessons hidden inside them, the lessons that remind us of who we are and who we want to be. Because in the end, it isn't the shouts that define us, it's the truths we carry forward, calm and unshaken.